in an attempted coup against the president. Yeah, that's 3.5 years of what the Democrat Socialists have been up to. Actually, it's more than that if you go back to the campaign and the closing days of the Obama administration, which of course you should. Remarkable. For a discussion on his new book and the trials and tribulations and vindication that Carter Page has earned, we're pleased to be joined by Carter Page, American citizen, model American citizen, graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy. A lot of people forget that. Successful businessman who served in America's clandestinely as a source for America's intelligence services. Carter, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, great to be with you, Dan and Amy.
So one of the things that has come out recently, in part with the plea agreement with former FBI attorney Kevin Kleinsmith, is that the CIA informed the FBI in August of 2016 that you were one of the individuals they worked with. You were an asset of the CIA. And yet the FBI persisted to pursue four surveillance warrants against you over the course of the intervening year and a half, despite knowing that you were working on behalf of our government via the CIA. How do you explain that?
Well, what's interesting, I mean, just shows the agenda that these people have, Dan. I was just serving my country, right? And unfortunately, there were a lot of bad actors acting within the, primarily the FBI, but also other elements within the government, the Obama administration's DOJ and other people sort of scattered around. And it's a long story, and but an exciting and important story in terms of exposing this. But I talk about all of this in my book, and unfortunately, there's a lot more to Mr. Kleinsmith than just that. I actually was in touch with him. A couple of the lawyers that were helping me back in, I had a long series, along the lines of my extensive support and interaction with the FBI and CIA previously. I had meetings throughout March of 2017, and one of the FBI agents I was with, he referred my attorney to Mr. Kleinsmith, actually, so they could work out some details. And unfortunately, when I started getting more death threats, which I had been getting for quite some time, I informed Mr. Kleinsmith of that. And unfortunately, not only did apparently nothing get done, but even worse, they continued to leak more sensitive and false, in many cases, misleading information to the big Washington Post and New York Times and NBC over the coming months. And unfortunately, the death threats just continued. So yes, I mean, there was a lot of, I think this new case that you're talking about starts, it's a first initial step, but there's definitely a lot more that should be coming.
What were the details that your attorney was attempting to work out with Kleinsmith? What details with respect to what?
Well, so, I had gone to 5 meetings with the FBI throughout the month of March 2017. And finally, my attorney, and he was kind of, and I along the lines of what you said at the open, I was just trying to set the record straight. And the attorney says, listen, I mean, this has just gone on too long, and these people are just asking you all kinds of ridiculous questions. Again, mostly related to the DNC-funded fake dossier, which was a bunch of Russian disinformation, which I knew at the time, but which has now more recently been uncovered just this year. But, he's like, listen, I mean, enough is enough already. We ought to negotiate a proffer letter or some basic procedural details, before you just continue this forever, because
sure.
This is just going nowhere. And and again, he actually turned out to be right. And again, I get into a lot of the details in my book, but unfortunately, again, they really did nothing, and I had no idea how devious the whole gang of them were
Yeah,
back in those days.
and it's well documented that you were proactively trying to engage, to answer questions, to tell your story. So that's an important point to make, and so stipulated here. But explain the CIA and FBI in this whole saga, because I think it would seem to the outside observer, wait a second, he's working with the CIA. Now he's under investigation by the FBI. The CIA has communicated with the FBI about their working relationship with Carter Page. Ultimately, they must have said something positive about you. Otherwise, why would you be working at their behest? You know, this arrangement, and yet the CIA just stood down and watched this go on for a year and a half without. There's no communication. I mean, I know the report is that Durham's going to be speaking with Brennan maybe today. But what about those individuals at the CIA who you interface with, and then the FBI? I mean, do those individuals communicate at all about an understanding of who Carter Page is and what he's doing?
Well, again, if you just read these 4 fake FISA warrants that people like James Comey and this week's DNC speaker Sally Yates and
Yes.
Andy McCabe and all these other bad actors in Washington were submitting to mislead the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court in Washington. You know, it's just completely out to lunch. Me and one of the lawyers I'm working with were going through it last night, and I mean, it's just every page is just so preposterous that anyone with any very basic dignity or very basic, common sense would realize that it makes no sense whatsoever.
So nobody at the CIA backed your play.
Apparently not. Again, and part of the problem, Dan, is that these people, they have not, they hide beneath secrecy, and they don't, a lot of, or I should say, some journalists have started to uncover this and are pretty upset that there has not been more disclosure out of the FBI. But unfortunately, the cover up just continues to this day, and a lot of people are very outraged that the FBI director Christopher Wray has not come clean in terms of giving a lot of the details that Congress has rightfully demanded.
Yeah,
so
Senator Johnson wants some of that information. Well, Carter Page, what toll has this taken on your life and your livelihood?
Well, Amy, I talk a lot about that in my book, but I always keep the big picture in mind. Any toll, the toll has been completely devastating on the one hand. On the other hand, I bear in mind that what they did to me was not, they don't care about me, obviously. Both the Democrats, the DNC, which funded this, their lawyers and their agents, and the Obama administration supporting U.S. intelligence community, which kind of were at the center of this whole scandal. So what I bear in mind is, they could care less about me. What they really wanted was to take out candidate Trump, then President-elect Trump, and really, to this day, you hear it continue. And again, I go back to my point about Sally Yates, who, signed the first 2 false FISA warrants to help do abusive process in the U.S. Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. And, unfortunately, there's just a complete detachment from reality and no real accountability. And they just keep, along the lines of Sally Yates' speech this week, just keep attacking and with no basis for it whatsoever. But again, the reason I wrote this book is I think, it provides a key inside story of what exactly happened. And I think at this historic turning point, when we're only 74 days from the election, it's important that America knows the truth.
It absolutely
that's
is.
The objective.
It absolutely is, which is it's great that you wrote this book, Abuse and Power. And Sally Yates, is a great example of what we've seen play out over the last 3 years, which is that the people in charge had no idea what was going on, so they say. They are remarkably uncurious people to rise to the level of to rise in their professions the way they did, to be the acting attorney general of the United States in the case of Sally Yates, to be the FBI director in the case of Jim Comey. Nobody asks any questions about the underlying evidence, the Steele dossier that's used to support the FISA warrants. Nobody asks any questions about it's an odd thing. This Carter Page, he's an agent for the Russian government, but the CIA hasn't figured it out yet because he's working for them. I mean, it is preposterous. And I wonder what kind of, if any, interactions you had with senior level people whose names many more Americans now know because of their participation in this attempted coup, as you describe it.
Well, I actually get into this in chapter 8 of my book, talking about the legal dimensions. On January 10th, 2017, 10 days before President Trump's inauguration, I was at an open session at the Council on Foreign Relations. Most of those meetings are not for attribution, but this was a live streamed open event, and Lisa Monaco, who was a senior White House official in the Obama administration, in her last couple of days in office, I asked her about this FISA abuse, which again was starting to leak out a little bit. And of course, she completely dodged my question. But it goes back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago about people having essentially no accountability and changing the subject as she did then, and as we continue to see to this day. But again, I think, as you're alluding to, and with this initial charging document and guilty plea by Mr. Kleinsmith, we're seeing a very small first step in terms of reestablishing the American justice system. And we'll have to see how it goes.
Senator Ron Johnson was asked after the Kleinsmith plea deal by Maria Bartiromo if there are other people who should be indicted, and he said yes, generally speaking, and he mentioned specifically Andy McCabe. I wonder if you think that, you're a sophisticated guy, you're a Naval Academy graduate, you're a business guy, you've gone through this all, you were on the inside of the intel services effectively. I wonder if you have particular names that you think should face not just accountability, but justice. In other words, should be criminally prosecuted. McCabe, Comey, Brennan, anyone?
Well, I am always, I've stayed out of trouble the last 4 years by not jumping to any conclusions. I keep an open mind, and I want to have all the facts. And I think it goes back to what we were just talking about, of there's just a lack of facts and a lack of accurate information. Now, yes, definitely there are some very damning clues and horrendous evidence about some serious wrongdoing that's been done. But unfortunately, a lot of it remains covered up. But again, I think, like the surprise we had last Friday with, Mr. Kleinsmith getting, having this initial charge against him, I think it's a first step. And there's a lot of clues. If you read that charging document closely, there's a lot of clues that he was acting with other actors. I think that's along the lines of what Chairman Johnson was talking about as well.
Were you interviewed by Durham?
No.
You were not interviewed. You haven't been interviewed by Durham or the other independent investigators, essentially independent counsels that have been animated by Department of Justice looking at unmasking of Michael Flynn and other matters?
Oh, look, a significant portion of the Durham probe has been about all the wrongdoing done, to take me down as a way of advancing this coup against President Trump. I have always said to the U.S. Department of Justice that if I can help in any way, I would be more than happy to. And I think what's interesting, and this goes to my point about the turning point that we're now seeing with this first step towards restoring justice last Friday. That procedurally, that was the first time that my civil rights were, some initial procedural and legal steps were taken to enforce that. there's this law called the Crime Victims' Rights Act, and that provides various elements whereby people who are crime victims, such as I, are given, some notification, and our Congress demands that they are treated justly. And I have been treated completely unjustly thus far. So many criminal acts in violation of the Privacy Act and so many other statutes. And I was encouraged because I was, U.S. Department of Justice did act in accordance with the law last Friday in terms of, making some of those accommodations for, the people who were so terribly wronged. But again, I'll always bear in mind the big picture that, what they did to me was, part of a political ploy to use the Department of Justice as well as the U.S. intelligence community to take out President Trump. Again, very much in concert with what we heard throughout the DNC all week, the last 4 days.
The term deep state is used to describe exactly what you're describing, which is not just the existence of intelligence agencies that operate in secrecy, but also the unaccountability aspect of it. That's the negative connotation of the deep state. I wonder what you thought about the CIA and about federal law enforcement agencies like the FBI going into your work on behalf of the U.S. government and the American people versus what you think about them today.
Yeah, well, look, I talk about a lot of this throughout my book, and I always keep the big picture in mind, Dan. I'm always concerned about what are the implications for other Americans and for our country in general. And unfortunately, this once respected court, U.S. Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court in Washington, which is so central to our national security and which Congress spent a lot of time over many decades trying to refine and make sure that, it supports national security on the one hand, but it also is respectful to U.S. constitutional rights. And it's just a complete disaster right now. Mm-hmm. And I think, President Trump has done an incredible job. I mean, he's a real human rights activist by trying to expose this and trying to take some steps towards restoring justice in America. But it's going to be a long road ahead, and we'll have to see how it plays out. But I thought it was essential to at least start putting out some of the key details so that the American public has a grip on reality, because so much of it, again, remains classified, and there's just been so much disinformation. Again, as we heard throughout this week.
He is Carter Page. He's a U.S. Naval Academy grad. He's a successful businessman who served his country clandestinely as a source for America's intelligence service. And the book, Abuse and Power, How an Innocent American Was Framed in an Attempted Coup Against the President. Carter Page, thanks so much for joining us. Good luck with the book.
Thanks so much, Dan.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
If you're talking about it, Dan and Amy are talking about it. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Is your student motivated in school? Do you feel he or she has more potential? St. John's Northwestern Academies has a proven track record of guiding students to discover their strengths and reach new heights. Located in southeast Wisconsin's Lake Country, St. John's Northwestern is an independent co-ed college preparatory day and boarding school for grades 7 through 12. Your child will experience small class sizes taught by dedicated faculty, not a computer.